Former Democratic Alliance leader and failed agriculture minister John Steenhusien made a pity party appearance with News24, which now is venturing out into blogs, with a News24 YouTube broadcast of an hour-long interview with John Steenhusien, in which he makes all sorts of claims, including his excellence, which is questionable at best. But John Steenhusien talks about how the hyenas were baying for him. Really, the hyenas. So they were out to get you from the very beginning. Then he tries to compare himself to leaders like Tony Blair and others who were ousted after spending many years in government. The bottom line with this is that the man failed epically. In the interview, he talks about how he was denied an opportunity and a promise was broken by the Democratic Alliance, in particular by his friend Jordan Hill Lewis, who had promised him that he would be allowed to continue his important work at the Department of Agriculture. Of course, what important work was he doing there? Going to Vietnam and selling 3 crates of stone fruit? No, ladies and gentlemen. He later admits in the interview that the foot and mouth disease preceded his arrival. So think about that for a second. That's a point that I've been raising since the very beginning, since this man was foolish enough and arrogant enough to believe he could be a minister and answer to the president of the republic, his boss, while being the leader of a political party and answering to his constituents, the voters. But then John Steenhusien never did answer to voters. He answered to the cabal that runs the Democratic Alliance. And he did so and made people happy enough by stroking their egos for long enough that he stayed in position far longer than he ever should have been. Remember, the Democratic Alliance lied to the South African public. After the 2024 national elections, they claimed they're the only national party that gained vote. They didn't gain any vote, folks. John Steenhusien got over 100,000 fewer votes than Musi Maimane got in 2019, with a larger voting population eligible. So think about that. But he spends his time with the tabloid of record, which, Cockprot 24, we'll just call it the tabloid of record now, after their shameful reference to another publication calling them a tabloid to besmirch them in what was listed as a news article, not an op-ed. But let's just talk about the tabloid of record's interview with Adrien Basson. Now, this is a publication with questionable journalistic practices, and they admit so. After Ronaldo Cruz sent a request into this publication, asking them why they're still calling Trump's refugee program a white Afrikaner farmer program, which it's not, and never has been, they refuse to accept evidence presented in front of them. Faces of people who are black and brown who've come to this country under the program, the actual stated position of the U.S. government on the embassy website, and they said that, well, from our position, this is a white refugee Afrikaner farmer program, which it's not. These are not journalistic practices. This is propaganda. This is yellow journalism. And these are the people who interviewed John Steenhusien, who's clearly bumhurt at having been ousted. The fact that he's a deputy minister is shameful. He should simply be sacked and removed from Parliament altogether for his conduct and for the lies he tells in this interview. You can tell that the man is bumhurt. He also tells a fairy tale narrative, which is very convincing if you don't know the history, about how, unlike, what happened to him, that should never happen. People shouldn't be making decisions based on social media or pressure groups that are minority that don't speak for farmers. This is what he said. But in fact, he completely ignored the foot and mouth disease epidemic for 18 months before he began taking any action. And then when pressure built on him and action was forced upon him by court cases, he laughed at the litigants who were trying to get access to the vaccines. The behavior of his chief of staff, Yana LaRue, in her email would appear to be what finally made people realize that this is the attitude in the Department of Agriculture towards farmers, one that they don't care. He went on to great lengths to talk about how Agri-SA is an organization based on democracy. But civic groups aren't there for democracy. They're there to achieve goals for their constituent communities. He also dismissed SAAI, questioning its structures and questioning its leadership. But this is the man who says that he was unceremoniously dumped unfairly. But the reality is that John Steenhusien was not dumped unfairly. John Steenhusien was removed from the ministry. But he hasn't left yet, has he? We haven't heard any formal announcement from President Ramaphosa that this guy is gone. All we've heard is that Jordan Hill Lewis is removing him. But Jordan Hill Lewis isn't his boss. His boss is Cyril Ramaphosa. But back to the situation with him being unceremoniously dumped. And he claims that what happened to him was wrong. Promises were made and people reacting to social media and pressure groups. He would never do that as leader. He would never do that as leader. Really? then why is Roman Cabenac not your chief of staff? He committed no offense. He broke no laws. He committed no corruption. Yet you suckered him to being your chief of staff, and then, like a cowardly lion, failed to defend him, which is the opposite of what you claimed in this interview. On top of that, you stand for people who are falsely accused by media, and while the wolves are baying at the side. Well, did you stand for Ronaldo Ruz? No, you didn't. You didn't stand for him. You were baying just like the wolves, looking for his removal. And your party removed Ronaldo Ruz. What is going on here? People banging tools, helicopters flying overhead. It was stark quiet out here 5 minutes ago. It's unbelievable. You can't find peace and quiet anywhere in this world these days. But you did nothing to defend Ronaldo Ruz. You did nothing to defend Roman Cabenac. In fact, you told him to resign illegally. He had a contract. So the hypocrisy of John Steenhusien in crying about wolves and talking, really, he called them hyenas gathering around and taking out the weak one in the herd. Well, I think that's the point here. The hyenas go for the weak one in the herd. And John Steenhusien, you were the weak one in the herd. The cowardly lion who was limping along, having accomplished nothing in the Democratic Alliance. You claim lots of things that you accomplished, and your sycophants in the Democratic Alliance claim that you accomplished quite a bit. But what did you accomplish? On the time when so much was happening in South Africa, with the rise of radical left-wing parties, with the perpetual lack of electricity in the country, with the service collapse, a time when the Democratic Alliance should have been striking hard and gaining over 30% of the electorate in the national election, you didn't go anywhere. You lost over 100,000 votes in a diminished voting pool. That's not an achievement. Then for 18 months, you ignored farmers, dismissed their concerns, and took no concrete action in foot and mouth disease as you answered to your boss, Cyril Ramaphosa, while ignoring your constituents in the Democratic Alliance. What exactly did he accomplish? And he wants empathy. He wants sympathy. He wants to paint a picture of how he was targeted. But this is the man whose Department of Agriculture, whether at his behest or not, we don't know, on a trip to Berlin with Agri-SA and SAI, because they didn't agree with the position that Theo de Jager and SAI had, simply removed him from the photograph, Soviet-esque style. You stand for the other guy. You would never allow people to remove people based on rumors. Really, you're vindictive, you're shameful, and you're an utter failure. We haven't even talked about the man's personal foibles. That's his problem. We're just talking about his political failures, and they're epic. Yet John Steenhusien and Adrian Besson create a 1-hour video, an interview, seeking sympathy for John Steenhusien. John Steenhusien deserves no sympathy. And people crying about the way he was ousted, they didn't cry about how Ronaldo Ruz was ousted when the federal committee voted to retain Ronaldo and that vote was overridden. Nobody jumped up for Ronaldo. No. This is a political party that picks and chooses who their winners are, and their angst and their anger is selective. What do you say, South Africa, Mzansi? Cheers.